Welcome everyone to Unit Masters. We are in week 3 now of cohort 8. And in this week, we're speaking about the different consensus mechanisms from technical and non-technical point of view, and why actually the Web3 space and all its new innovations are so disruptive to Web3. And today we have Alec here, and Alec is actually a polymath in the way that he was a professional, or is a professional high stakes poker player. And he's also a digital entrepreneur and a keynote speaker, speaking a lot about how you can apply the fundamental principles of poker to different parts of life. And he's also a very well-known influencer in the crypto education space. So he typically hosts a lot of videos about everything you need to know about basics of blockchains, and then he explains insights when analyzing different blockchain projects, which you know about DeFi and gaming and metaverse and so on and so forth. So today, actually, we have the pleasure of hearing his sharings about all you need to know about. Well, you will share with us. It's quite
well, not everything you need to know, but at least a high level overview.
About 21 million units in this world of a special entity. I'm gonna leave you sharing the stage, and also I want to make you a co-host so that you can share your screen.
Okay, I'm probably not going to need to share screen. I didn't put together slides, but thank you for that.
Okay, please, the stage is all yours.
Yeah, okay, so at the end, my understanding is we'll take questions too, is that right?
Yes. So we have about 20-25 minutes of your sharing. Also, please share your personal story too, because it's quite fascinating of how you became like into how you got into Web3 so deeply and why you're getting into it so deeply.
Okay.
And at the end, we have rooms for open questions.
Okay, so a couple things. I'll keep my story brief. You did a great overview. Thank you. If you watch the first video on my YouTube, let me just pop this up so you can see where it is. I talk more about my crypto story, so I'm not going to belabor it here just because there's like a 20-minute video on it. So let me pull up my YouTube. This video here, like right when you pop into my channel, talks a lot about how I got into crypto from poker, but my crypto journey. So yeah, I started playing poker when I was 18. I traveled to 50 countries since then. I've been playing for 16 years professionally, and I built a poker training site. Started sharing my journey on YouTube it's like 2014. So this was like early days of YouTube. And so I had kind of one of the first poker YouTubes. I did this show called The Hand of the Day, where I would share a hand of poker I played from somewhere interesting around the world. And I broke that down into a like kind of simple, linear, understand way. And that really caught on. So I built one of the biggest brands in poker. And then from there, I started to see demand for people wanting to learn about poker training. So built a poker training site. That was just like a natural fit. Became a published author. I wrote a book on poker called The Poker Coach. So that's on consciouspoker.com, where all of my poker training is. And then we have a youtube.com/consciouspospoker with I think 600 videos, a lot of content on there. It's been doing it for 5-6 years. So I got into crypto in 2017. I actually originally opened a YouTube in 2017 about crypto because I wanted to share my crypto journey, but I realized there was so much to learn and I didn't really know what was going on in the beginning. So I spent 4 years pretty much researching, and I would say part-time or full-time in crypto during that time, on and off, depending on my demands in the poker space. But I spent thousands of hours researching, reading everything I could about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and the NFTs and play to earn games, the market. And so also like an active user. And I would say like one of the key things for me was like the key shifts in was being a participant of the crypto world as opposed to learning about it. It's kind of like you could read a lot of books about poker, but until you sit down and actually move chips around and make bets in the heat of the moment, it's hard to really understand how everything works. And so how markets behave, how psychology works, how like these bubbles happen. And so really being an active participant in crypto really, really helped. So I think even as a test, one action item is, it's not like financial advice, not saying buy Bitcoin because it's going to go up. I'm saying like spend $10 and interact with various protocols to understand how they work. You're going to get thousands of dollars worth of value from doing that. So I've been full-time in crypto since a year and a half, but like I said, I've been very part-time in it for the first years of my journey. And then I really started opening a YouTube and sharing after about 4 years in the space, when I felt like, okay, I mean, I'm not, not an expert. You're always going to keep learning more. It could take 100,000 hours to learn everything. But at least I know enough to be able to help others on their journey. So that was something that I wanted to do after poker, sharing my journey in the poker space. Really felt connected to doing that in the crypto space, and really passionate about the movement in general and the ways that it could change the world. So I wanted to talk today and give a high level overview about Bitcoin, and take some questions at the end. So my focus here is to really do a summary of the beliefs that I have after researching, learning about crypto, which also takes you down the rabbit hole, learning about finance, economics, game theory, which is kind of the core of my talk, something I understand really well from poker, the history of money, etc. So I wrote a series on my Substack called The Future of Money, which summarizes all this in a series of blogs. I'm producing those videos on my YouTube as well, called The Future of Money. There's a playlist. So, keep in mind, I don't have a degree in economics or finance. Many people disagree with my conclusions, but poker's taught me one thing. It's that I'm often wrong. I may be here, but these are just what I tried to do in this talk was basically put together the consensus ball, my ideas. So, Bitcoin and money are quite a deep rabbit hole. So, this is kind of the start of the journey. And that's kind of how I try to cater this talk. So you may be familiar with the origin story of crypto. So I'll keep it brief, but on October 31st, 2008, a computer programmer, goes by the pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto. He releases a white paper. It's basically a peer-to-peer electronic cash system called Bitcoin. He implemented the Bitcoin software code as open source code, released it on January 3rd, 2009. So what many people don't know, or maybe they gloss over, is really what was embedded into the blockchain on that message. And it says, and I quote here, it says, "The Times, January 3rd, 2009, Chancellor on the brink of second bailout for banks." So it was in the middle of the global financial crisis, and the stability of our current financial system was quite in question here. So this is a dense statement. I could see how, on the offset in the beginning, Bitcoin and crypto seem confusing and overwhelming, but the idea is really quite simple. So I'm going to try and explain things using first principles, which just means reducing things to their absolute essence. But I think from this standpoint, one can really begin to see the problem that cryptocurrency itself, specifically Bitcoin, actually, I think we have to separate Bitcoin from the rest of crypto, but you can start to see the problem that Bitcoin is trying to solve. And to me, this is really everything. So you may have been told about the wonders of crypto. You've heard about crypto. You've seen people make astronomical figures or huge returns. But without understanding the why of crypto, the why of Bitcoin, you're not going to have the conviction to hold through, because 50% pullbacks, as you've seen recently, are pretty common. So when one is just entering the rabbit hole, they're going to ask a question. They're going to ask a question like, okay, the first question I get asked by people is, what is Bitcoin? So in a word, Bitcoin is money. But then you're like, okay, well, that led me down to a second question, which is, what is money? And this is where everyone's, I think, Bitcoin journey really begins, with this simple yet very profound question. So in my research, I found that money is really just time. Money is our best attempt to preserve and then transfer time through space. So anyone can exchange their time for money, right? We all do this. But contrary to what Ben Franklin says, he says time is money, but I actually believe time is not money. So if you ask a 20-year-old, for example, if they'd want to trade their time for a dying billionaire's wealth, that would be insane, because you can't have money to spend if you run out of time to do it. So it's kind of like this, right? You remember in school when you're like, similarly to how all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares. Money is time, okay, but time is not quite money. So this will come back to Bitcoin in a second, but money is basically our way of encapsulating time in a medium that we can then exchange with other people. This is why we use the verb spend, of course, in reference to how we allocate it. So you can think of money, I guess, as that middle layer between one's time and what they want to trade it for. And this, intermediary serves to preserve the preciousness of the base layer. And so I really think, looking back at the history of money, I read a good essay by Nick Bazos that really kind of summarizes this. And I think that it could be said that humanity's quest to discover money was basically a desire to bottle up time in a way that's permanent and transferable, so we can use it for other things. So the question I think I would like to, kind of start to ponder is, and hopefully this will help have Bitcoin make more sense, is that why do we have a financial system that relies on an ever increasing amount of debt and an ever expanding supply when the asset the debt represents, which is time, is absolutely finite? Okay, so put it another way, given that money is meant to encapsulate time, doesn't it only make sense that the currency which backs it is the one with the most limited supply and also the scarcest, just like time? So that's kind of like the high level overview here. So don't forget that idea. So as long as you remember that money is time, I'm confident that the more you learn about Bitcoin, the more it will make sense why Bitcoin is what I believe is the best form of money and why it's really desperately needed to save us from the time theft that exists in our centralized financial system. So it can be said that fiat, or money that is centrally controlled, backed by governments, is really a broken system. When we leave the management of the currency to a central agency, they could print it at whim without consequence, and it leads to the debasement of value for those who actually save in the currency. And unfortunately, in our society, this is most often poor people that live paycheck to paycheck. They don't have the means to store their wealth in what's called hard assets, meaning things that are physical, tangible outside the fiat system. They can't buy houses or stocks. This leads to a big increase in the wealth gap. This is actually known as the Cantillon effect, Cantillon, Cantillon effect. And it's the idea that those who are closest to the money printer, those who get the money first, benefit the most, since they could borrow the newly printed money at the best interest rates because they're the most creditworthy, and those interest rates are really, really low. Then what do? They go buy assets with that money, which is printed out of thin air. And this, of course, those assets increase in price, such as stocks and real estate, and then makes it more expensive for the average person who's left paying higher prices. And so that's how that leads to a wealth gap. But you can look up the Cantillon effect for more information on this aspect. But when prices rise over time due to there being more money, right now there's more money competing for the same amount of goods, the poor people are stuck paying the bills. So it's said that inflation is a hidden tax. You might maybe have heard of that, like, it's this hidden tax, because most people really don't understand how it works. But I actually think, and this is based on some research here, tax doesn't really quite do it justice. What's really happening is money, again, bottled up time, right, is being siphoned from poor people and given to the rich people, essentially, right? It's being funneled over here to those that are closest to the newly printed money. So if you look throughout history and you really think about it from first principles, right, the forced stealing of time from others is best defined as slavery. So for just how pervasive the time theft of central banking has been on humanity, check out Bitcoin philosopher, one of my favorites, Robert Breedlove's work. He has a podcast called The What is Money Show, but he wrote a great series on Medium. These are like really deep dive posts called Masters of Slaves and Money. And I'll type his name here. I'm typing to one direct person, but his name is Robert Breedlove. Definitely someone to follow in the Bitcoin space. So of course, this theft of human time isn't the only problem with fiat. The excess printing of money, of course, has led to hyperinflations, most famously the Weimar Republic in the 1920s. It's a great book called When Money Dies, if you want to learn more about how that process happens. But we've seen this recently in Zimbabwe, Venezuela, etc. So the real aha moment for me, and I heard this in a talk by Parker Lewis, was that I realized we weren't on a different curve than these countries because we operate under the same system. So we're just at a different point on the same curve. That's like a big, profound moment for me. Some would argue, so we're not like, it's not like we're at a different point. Or, sorry, it's not that we're on a different curve than other countries that have suffered from these outcomes. We're just at a different point on that exact same curve. So that was a pretty important realization for me. And just for reference, in the U.S., we've printed 40% of all dollars in the last 12 months. So a lot has been happening recently that is leading to more challenges with fiat. So I guess it's one of those phenomenons too, that once you see the problems with fiat, you can't unsee them, right? So once people like cross over the bridge to the other side, they never go back. There's like a one-way street here, a one-way exit from the fiat system. So once one loses faith in fiat, they never regain it. And it's because of this that I think there will eventually be a run on the bank scenario where like mass collective sort of wakes up. I don't know when this point is or how many people it's going to be, but it's going to be a straw that broke the camel's back moment where we reach a tipping point where people no longer trust storing their wealth in fiat. They look to move to hard assets. And like Hemingway famously observes, this process happens gradually, then suddenly, which is subsequently the title of Parker Lewis's series on finance and Bitcoin. Someone else you should check out, Parker Lewis. He's great. So to put simply, our entire financial system could be thought of as it's sort of like a game of musical chairs. Remember when you were a kid, you're playing musical chairs? So everyone's kind of like singing, dancing merrily as long as the music's playing, but you really don't want to be the one scrambling for a chair when the music stops. That was kind of the moral of the story with a lot of my research in history of money and fiat. So it's better early than late, and that's why I've been spending the last 5 years of my time really looking for chairs, frankly. And it's important to realize, I guess, coming back to my story about Bitcoin, is I didn't start learning about Bitcoin because I had some bias towards it. I started learning about money, the problems with centralized system, the problems with fiat, and that rabbit hole eventually leads me to Bitcoin, which is what I believe is the best form of money, which we'll talk about in a second. So now I think it's important to examine the properties of money, right? So once you're understanding of, get to this point of what money is, I think once we compare different forms of money side by side, one can decide where they'd rather store their wealth. So typically, like people have a choice, independent economic participants, right? We're all like just participating in an economy, have a choice of where to store their savings. So most commonly, this is one's local currency, which is fiat or gold. And I really, that really changed in 2009 when Satoshi Nakamoto released Bitcoin into the world, introducing a third form of money, what I'd argue a superior one. So before we examine the properties of Bitcoin, what makes it unique, let's first examine what properties lead to a commodity being used as money. So for something to be used as money, it has to be the consensus of people converging around one commodity. This has happened many, many times throughout history. And if you look through various societies, they've used shells, they've used beads, they've used tobacco, precious metals, livestock. So we really have a long history, if you dive into the history of money, of the commonalities of these elements. Like what are the properties that have made different commodities emerge over time and become money? So there's pretty strong consensus on this as well of the objective factors. So I'm not like making these things up. My whole thing is connecting these factors to what, and then evaluating Bitcoin and gold side by side. But for something to be considered money, it really has to possess these 7 traits. Okay, so first it has to be fungible, meaning like your $1 is exchangeable for another dollar. So they're all units of the same currency or the same. It has to be portable is number 2. Money has to be easily moved from one place to another. That's very important for something to become money. It has to be able to be moved around. It has to be durable is number 3. So it has to be able to resist, wear or decay. This is why certain metals are not very good as money, because they decay easily. It has to be acceptable. This is probably the 4th one. It has to be widely distributed and accepted by a lot of people. Otherwise, what good is money if people don't accept it? 5th, it has to be uniform. All versions of the same denomination have to have the same purchasing power. That's very important. 6, it has to be divisible. It's very, very important. In fact, that's why silver was ended up used as money. Gold wasn't as divisible. But one unit has to be broken down into smaller units to pay for a wide range of goods or services, right? Like, that's why livestock's not that great. You can't just cut a cow in half, and he's not half a cow. The cow's dead. It's not that good for money. Okay, and last, and this is the most important, money has to be a store of value. So the limited supply of the money in circulation ensures its value is preserved over time. So fiat currency possesses the first 6 characteristics of money, but it's designed to lose value over time due to inflation. So it's not a store of value. Fiat currency is not a store of value. If you look at a chart, it's like a straight down chart. You might have seen one of these charts where the value of $100 in 1900, and now that $100 is worth $3. So it's designed to lose value over time. So it can't really be considered money. It's actually currency. So gold, on the other hand, is a store of value. Its purchasing power has been preserved for thousands of years. I think I remember looking specifically, an ounce of gold could buy a nice suit in the Roman era, and it could still buy a nice suit today. It's kind of like basically has the same relative purchasing power. So learning to distinguish between money and currency may seem subtle, but it's really profound. There's a great talk on this. I talk about I summarize this in The Future of Money versus Currency in episode 4, I believe. But you could watch Hidden Secrets of Money as well. I'll type this in the chat, by Mike Maloney. Watch episode 1. He talks about the difference between money and currency. And so, if you look at neurolinguistic programming, NLP, it's a field of study which examines how words shape our beliefs and are actually literally used to program how we see the world, right? So if you begin to properly identify fiat as currency and gold and Bitcoin as money, then it helps to kind of reinforce the problems with fiat and the benefits of hard money. So I think it's important to kind of distinguish between these two things, because they're very, very unique. And that's kind of helps that mass awakening in people to see that fiat and Bitcoin are not actually the same thing. So the core of my talk is really here, and I think it's the first principle upon which to build one assumptions about the future, is that looking through the past, looking back in history of how society converges on money is that I believe people will ultimately converge around the best form of money to store their wealth, right? And I believe the reason is due to game theory, which, unlike economics, finance, which I had to learn about from scratch, I would say I'm an expert in due to poker. So, excuse me. Game theory is a framework, just high level overview. Okay, it's a framework for decision making in situations where competing players, they're motivated by differing incentives. That's like a high level overview. So it's pioneered by John von Neumann. Game theory was actually developed as he aimed to solve the problem of bluffing in poker. So this whole field of science now is applied to war and all these other things is actually developed, birthed out of trying to solve the problem of poker. So just so happens, like, I've played poker for many years, so I've actually got to apply these sort of things firsthand. So how it works in poker is basically, if I discover my opponent's bluffing too often, like let's say I know this guy's bluffing all the time, what do? I'm going to start calling him more often to try and win when he's bluffing. So this approach works against bad players who are very exploitable. They don't really have, they don't really know how to play their hands. But against top professionals, things aren't so simple. So if my very good opponent starts by bluffing 100% of the time, now I start calling him more often. But now he's a thinking player. So he realizes that I adjusted and started calling him. So now he starts betting only when he has really, really good hands. Because now he sees I'm calling him all the time. He starts betting with good hands. At this point, I change my strategy to his change of strategy, and then I start folding again. So as this pattern continues, we kind of go in this circular loop until we're both changing our game plan hand by hand. So now he's basically forced to adopt a mixed strategy where he's betting with strong hands, he's betting with weak hands, so that he's not too predictable. So then the only way for me to counter is by doing the same thing. I'm calling with my strong hands, folding my weaker ones. So if you take this to the extreme, which we've done recently with computers, if two supercomputers are playing against another, they basically reach a point where both machines adopt a perfectly balanced strategy because they can't be exploited. There's no value to be gained by trying to bluff too often or too little because they've solved the frequencies that they're supposed to adopt. So poker players call this a game theory optimal strategy, and top professionals use it when they believe no edge can be gained by exploiting their opponent's weaknesses. So in game theory, and this is kind of like the important part, it's referred to as the Nash equilibrium. So it's named after the mathematician John Forbes Nash Jr., and it's basically a solution in non-cooperative games in where each player is assumed to know the equilibrium or ideal strategy of the other players, and therefore no edge can be gained by changing one's own individual strategy. So what I really didn't expect in studying game theory was that it would help me to understand money. So I believe that the logic why a poker player uses game theory can also be applied to a society's choice for money. So if you think about it, when it comes to choosing a type of money, game theory really teaches us that people are incentivized to choose the best option that is the most efficient and best maintains monetary value of that asset that they chose. Because a failure to do so leads to one's wealth being lost as the harder money or the better money replaces an inferior money. So inevitably, it's kind of like poker, where like you're incentivized to play the hand the best way possible, otherwise you'll lose money. The same can be applied to a society. They're incentivized to store their wealth in the hardest asset, otherwise they're going to lose value to people that store wealth in a harder asset. So this kind of leads to the most efficient money winning over the long term, just as the poker player utilizing the best strategy inevitably pulls ahead over a large enough sample size. So we can illustrate this phenomenon with a simple thought experiment, right? So imagine that two members of a tribe, imagine that multiple members of a tribe are debating whether to use gold or aluminum as money. They can't agree, right? They disagree. And so they leave it open to the society to use whatever they want. And they just say, you know what, I'll take 1 ounce of your gold for 1 ounce of my aluminum. So what's going to happen? The aluminum is going to corrode. Remember, we talked about the preservability aspect of money, and they'll eventually end up using gold. So this played out on a global scale over thousands of years, and countries around the world converged on gold as money, and it's actually known as the Belle Epoque. The entire world was on the gold standard in the early 1900s. So failure to adopt the hardest money has historically led to complete calamity for societies that don't do it. So for example, this happened many times throughout history, but one example is in the 15th century, West Africa actually used glass beads as money because they were very, very hard for locals to produce. But meanwhile, in Europe, the Venetians were much more advanced as a society, and they used the gold standard. And the superior technology in Venice made glass relatively easy to manufacture. It cost a lot less because they were on a harder form of money. So seeing the opportunity, when they figured out that these Africans really valued these glass beads and they were used as money, they could buy anything. Savvy entrepreneurs basically sought currency arbitrage. They literally filled boats with beads. They sailed south and they bought things for, pennies on the pound or glass on their gold, I guess. But this really brought so much destruction to the citizens of Africa that these beads became known as slave beads. If you look up slave beads on Wikipedia, you'll actually find this story because it basically enslaved the population of the Africans to hand of the Venetians because they could literally just debase their entire currency because they could print it at a cheaper cost because they had a harder money. So in short, the Europeans' use of gold as money allowed them to siphon wealth from Africa, whose currency can easily be manipulated. And basically, the Africans were brought to their knees in this point, and they had to switch to the gold standard. So as world-renowned economist Saifedean Ammous observes in his most notable work, The Bitcoin Standard, highly implore you to read this. It's like, there's one book you can read on Bitcoin, read The Bitcoin Standard. He says, and I quote, "History shows it's not possible to insulate yourself from the consequences of others holding money that's harder than yours." So money's not really a choice, I guess is the point that he's making. So to borrow a poker terminology, gold has historically been the game theory optimal choice for money. Right. So if you think about what is the game theory optimal way to play money, gold has been the choice for thousands of years because no other option has yet proven itself to better satisfy the criteria of money. So that's why gold was the best form of money, because it would best satisfy all the properties. But one of the key things we're taught when we first learned about investment is past performance doesn't guarantee future results. The question that I would pose is that if a better form of money existed, would society converge around it as the world's store of wealth? So using the first principles we talked about here, I think that the best form of money ultimately wins, and money tends to one, meaning society converges on one medium as money, and that's the one that best preserves the base layer of the time it represents. So I think it's only fair to reason that if a new, better form of money existed, that game theory would incentivize people to store their wealth there and ultimately would lead to society using harder form of money. And I believe this money is Bitcoin. So if we place on a side-by-side comparison, I think Bitcoin better satisfies the properties of money outshining even gold. Can't go into all seven characteristics. You can look at them yourself. There's actually beautiful infographics where you can look at the properties of Bitcoin in comparison to the properties of gold. Of course, both of those demolish the abysmal fiat. But the two that I'd like to highlight, let's just look at two: divisibility and scarcity. So Bitcoin solves one of gold's problems, which is why silver was actually used. And there's actually a high, we call it a rake in poker, which is like a tax essentially on using gold or transferring large amounts. It could get lost and it's very expensive. But one Bitcoin can be divided into 100 million units. We can break this number down further if we need to, but it's called Satoshis. So the limit can be broken down further if, like I said, if necessary, which makes Bitcoin the most divisible money in history. But really, Bitcoin shines in that it's scarce, the closest thing we have to mimicking time itself, because Bitcoin has a fixed supply of 21 million. No more Bitcoin will ever be issued, and it has a predictable and fixed inflation schedule, which will issue new Bitcoin until the year 2140. And you could look more into that, going down the rabbit hole further. But the point I want to drive home is that it really is the most efficient form of money, and I believe this will lead it to be globally adopted as a store of value. And the reason it's really volatile now is that it's new technology and price discovery, which is subject to market participants behaving rationally, irrationally. So the market's not only tradable 24/7, but as independent economic actors like you, me, corporations, governments, all go down the rabbit hole and try and learn about the problems with fiat, money, etc. These are things that we're not really taught in school. It takes thousands of hours, hundreds of hours to learn about these things. They slowly wake up to what's going on, and then they slowly, over time, and then surely decide to store their wealth in Bitcoin. So that's basically what's happening on a global scale. We're seeing that play out, which is why if you look at a graph of Bitcoin's price performance against the dollar is just going straight down against Bitcoin because people are choosing a harder form of money. That's what's happening here. So this has led Bitcoin to be the best performing asset of the past decade. And I think personally, this is me. I'm a poker player, so take my opinion with a grain of salt. But volatility to me means opportunity. So when Bitcoin's price is no longer volatile, think about what will happen at that point. When it's no longer volatile, why? It's no longer volatile because it's achieved its mission of becoming the global store of value, at which point it's going to be a unit of account and merely a savings technology. It's not meant to appreciate. It's meant to be a savings technology, right? It's meant to be placed like gold where people can store their wealth. Nobody's meant to get rich on gold. They're meant to preserve wealth. The only reason that we're at that phase is because it's a price discovery. It's being monetized. This is like a once in a 2,000 year event, right? This hasn't happened since gold. So it's hard for people to see because it doesn't happen often. It hasn't happened in our lifetime. It hasn't happened in anyone that we've ever known, that's known everyone, that's ever known anyone's lifetime. It's happened, thousands of years ago, frankly. So as the price increases due to people waking up, choosing to store their wealth in Bitcoin, they opt out of the madness of central banking, fiat. Some people decide to consume things with their newly appreciated savings, right? They go buy a house, and so this leads to sell off in Bitcoin in exchange for real world goods and services, which of course causes drop in price. So we talked about Bitcoin being the best form of money. I really do believe that, but Bitcoin's evolution to money isn't something that's going to happen overnight. Like people, they overestimate technology in the short term and they underestimate it in the long term, right? It's how the old adage goes. So it's the result, remember, of society just converging on Bitcoin as the best store of value. So this becomes, requires a lot of education, like I said, which is part of why I'm really passionate about sharing things in the space to help accelerate that process forward. But money is typically evolved over 3 phases, just to kind of help understand about how I believe this is going to play out, looking back at the things I've studied. So first is the store of value. First, money has to be a store of value. Then it's a medium of exchange, meaning people are interacting in it. And finally, it's a unit of account, meaning people are denominating prices in that currency. So Bitcoin's still relatively new. It's in the store of value phase. So we're in phase 1 right now. It's going to play out over 3 phases, I believe. And it's widely debated about the timeline of how this is going to unfold. There's radical theories on both sides, but I think there's consensus in the fact that it will take time. You could look into hyper Bitcoinization, which is a theory of how Bitcoin's going to monetize the world. It's interesting, and I think they overestimate the brevity in which this will happen. But anyway, just give you a high level overview of where we are now. Depending on the day, maybe not as much recently, but the current market cap of Bitcoin, let's call it $1 trillion of the Bitcoin market, right? So this is 1/10 of the market cap of gold, which is 10 trillion. But remember, Bitcoin's a better form of money than gold, objectively, at least I believe, in my opinion. So if you believe efficiency will win, or that game theory will prove correct, we have an easy 10x from here. It's a better form of money than gold. It should be worth more than gold. It's more valuable than gold, in my opinion. So that's just comparing it on a side-by-side basis to gold. So that's why I believe it's undervalued, even if it doubles, even at all-time highs. Maybe it goes in these temporary bubbles where it's overvalued and undervalued on the short scale, but in the macro, in terms of the problem that it's trying to solve, I still think it's a better form of money than gold. So anytime it's valued under than gold, it's pretty easy to see that that's going to outpace in the long term. But I believe we're just really getting started. I actually think we're living through the greatest wealth transfer in history. I have a new article coming out about this. But we're seeing the death of an asset class. So global bonds are paying negative yields. There's $30 trillion that are going to be looking for a new home when people finally wake up and smell the coffee that they're losing money buying bonds and they're taking risk by holding fiat-backed assets. So the boomer generation, this is kind of how I see it playing out. The boomer generation and beyond, when they move into hard assets, they're going to own gold. They're not going to own Bitcoin. They're probably not going to get on the Bitcoin train, which is fine. But people in their 40s, let's say, they may own some of both. They're like, okay, I can see the value of gold. I can see the value of Bitcoin. But a millennial and beyond is going to own Bitcoin and not gold. Right? They're not going to go into gold. They're going to go to the future. They're not going to go back in the past. So this means that in the span of a few generations, like as the richest generation in history transfers their wealth to the millennials and beyond, I believe we're going to see massive inflows into Bitcoin, and we're going to see the greatest wealth transfer the world's ever seen, with much of that money flowing into Bitcoin. So it doesn't stop there. Remember, money evolves over 3 phases, right? It ends with a unit of account. So if Bitcoin is going to become globally adopted, all prices are going to be denominated in. So here in America, we use US dollars to denominate transactions, but this is inefficient because we don't know the current nor future supply, right? So in a Bitcoin economy, we can say that the value of a Bitcoin will be the entire economy that exists divided by the 21 million Bitcoins that are in existence. So this is kind of like a radical and far off concept, but here's a simple thought experiment to ponder about this, okay? So imagine an economy with 2 people, right? We have Alice and Bob. We have 2 people randomly in the economy. Alice fishes, Bob catches squirrels. They each have 1 Bitcoin. So now Alice builds a net to catch more fish, and therefore she can catch fish more efficiently than Bob can catch squirrels. So thereby she whittles away Bob's Bitcoin. She's like accumulating Bitcoin because her methods of farming are more efficient than his. So now Bob adapts to build a spear, and so that he can catch squirrels as fast as she can catch fish to buy some of his Bitcoin back, right? So these 2 items that are built into the economy, these value-added items, the net and the spear, they're capital goods. They exist within the economy, but there's only 2 Bitcoins. So the value of the Bitcoin is essentially everything that exists in that economy. But it really doesn't end there. It's everything that also will exist in that economy in the future. So I imagine a world where most of the wealth is stored in Bitcoin. People defer consumption of present goods by resting assured they will preserve their purchasing power over time. And when they desire something, they'll sell their Bitcoin for that good or service. But that's the main reason why they would sell Bitcoin, to consume something of real world value, like a good or service. So at this time, like I said, when Bitcoin's a unit of account, there's not going to be volatility. We'll have a quite stable price of Bitcoin, some volatility, but not a lot. Volatility would come down as the market cap increases, more people store their wealth in it. And, a fiat world where people are losing purchasing power every year. You've heard about 7% inflation here in the US, highest number in 50 years. People, what does that do? When you're bleeding 7%, when you're getting taxed 7%, or you're getting 7% of your money is getting stolen, right, frankly. What do? You have to do something to outpace that, or you just lose, right? You have to work 7% harder, but you have to do something. So it incentivizes people to speculate on assets that outperform inflation, which are typically real estate and equities. But this has led to huge bubbles in both assets, which is why we're in the everything bubble. But I think these bubbles will soften as Bitcoin takes a larger share of this pie. Stocks will trade at more reasonable premiums on a hard money standard. People won't need to speculate to outpace inflation. Most don't want to take additional risk to bottle up their time and spend it later. Most people actually would be content to just defer consumption. If they bottle up a lot of time now and they want to spend that time in 5 years, they're happy to just not have to do anything to take on additional risk. That luxury becomes possible in a Bitcoin economy where those with a lower time preference, meaning they have more future-oriented decision-making, are simply rewarded by deferring consumption. So on a Bitcoin standard, one purchasing power actually increases over time, right? Technology brings down the price of goods. Remember when when you were a kid, I don't know how old you are, but you had a floppy disk or a CD-ROM and it could only hold 5 songs, and now you can hold like 1,000 million songs on your iPhone. That's technology increases things over time. So the price gets cheaper. So you're going to be incentivized to defer consumption to buy something better tomorrow than you can today. So this is kind of just the beginning of a very deep rabbit hole that is not just Bitcoin, but value. We talked about economics, finance, history, psychology, game theory. So I encourage you to explore it further. I believe it's the most captivating thing happening in society today. Couldn't imagine, being into crypto and then not being into crypto. But here's like a little framework that I would leave you with to conclude on your own whether Bitcoin's going to get adopted, right? So my 2 frameworks are: they must conclude Bitcoin is the best form of money, and you can do that on your own. We discussed that briefly. Do your own research. Watch The Future of Money on my channel, read The Future of Money on my Substack if you want a summary of this, but read The Bitcoin Standard. If you're more financially savvy, Gradually Then Suddenly by Parker Lewis, follow Robert Breedlove, go down the rabbit hole, right? So second, one must believe that efficiency always wins in the end. Well, I believe this first principle applies to many facets of life, but in the case of Bitcoin, it means that society will ultimately converge on the best form of money to store their value. So remember that our fiat system, I guess the last thought, is that it can be thought of as one game of musical chairs. Right now, the music's playing loud. We're printing a lot of money. Everyone's dancing and singing. We're feeling subtle effects of inflation. We're not really feeling it. It's just starting. So many are still dancing around as their hard assets are appreciating in dollar terms. But also remember that Bitcoin is the ultimate unit of count. And since its invention just over a decade ago, the dollar has gotten absolutely crushed in Bitcoin terms. So one thing you can start to do as you enter the rabbit hole is begin denominating your wealth in Bitcoin. As the popular meme goes in the crypto community, 1 Bitcoin is equal to 1 Bitcoin, because people are measuring things in Bitcoin. So it's also been said that the further you look into the past, the further you can see into the future. Just remember, every single instance of fiat has ultimately failed given a long enough time horizon. And as Voltaire says, I guess the fiat always returns to its intrinsic value, which is 0. So I would encourage everyone to look for their chair while the music's still playing, because you really don't want to be scrambling when it stops. So hope you enjoyed this, and thank you for letting me speak today, and happy to take any questions. I know I went over a little bit, but it's hard to cover everything about Bitcoin in 20 minutes.
That's okay, don't worry. We have it was very intense and rich in information, but good thing is we recorded and you have a lot of supplementary documentation online. So for all
that's necessary, I feel like, for people to kind of like learn more about the specific topic that we're talking about.
Yeah, maybe let's talk about, just in a nutshell, you mentioned there's a 10x opportunity of increase, but maybe from devil's advocate side, basically, what needs to go wrong so that, this 10x won't be reached? What are basically the major assumptions we need to question if we want to look at, the market very critically?
Yeah, I mean, the questions to assumption, sorry, the things to, so definitely nothing's financial advice. Don't take my word for it. This is just what I'm personally betting my wealth on. But I would say you'd have to agree on the macro, right? You have to agree that there's a place for hard assets as people are leaving the fiat system. You have to agree that there are problems with fiat. You have to agree that people are going to wake up and not want to store their wealth in fiat. You have to agree that they're going to be a run for the exits. You have to agree that that gold has a use case to begin with, because the same first principles that apply to why someone would value gold and why someone would be concerned about debasement in fiat are the same reasons why they're going to choose Bitcoin. I just think over time, people are going to choose Bitcoin over gold. So I think Bitcoin's almost a leveraged bet on the gold narrative. So it's kind of like that. Like if you don't think that there's ever been a place for gold historically, and that no one's ever going to care about the problems with fiat, then Bitcoin might not be the best bet for you. So it's really important to kind of agree on. That's why I started the talk on what is money, the history of money, the problems with fiat, because that kind of leads people down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. So I think it's important to kind of have conviction on those first principles of what we talked about in the beginning. What is money, the history of money, why certain monies perform better than other monies, why we have problems with fiat and central banking, and then arrive at Bitcoin as a conclusion to that. And then once you compare Bitcoin to gold, I think that's easier. Like once you look at Bitcoin and gold comparatively, that's almost easier to see that like Bitcoin outperforms. Just on scarcity, like gold can be mined. Like you're mining gold every year. I think there was some talks about this, that they're trying to mine gold on an asteroid. What happens if they find millions of tons of gold on an asteroid and they just double the supply in 5 to 10 years, right? So that can't happen with Bitcoin. So that's easier, I think. But I think the macro is what's harder.
Yeah, thank you very much for pointing this out. This is, I hope that we also convey within the Unit Masters program that it's super important to be very conscious about the assumptions that are behind a certain ecosystem, and then to be very conscious about whether we agree or disagree with these. That's why we basically have these assignments where you guys are supposed to look at the different ecosystems and understand their genesis and the worldviews that people have that are building these. That's why we bring you a bunch of different speakers, so that you can also understand, to see the world through different perspectives and then decide where you want to stand on this entire universe. With a question from Zach here, who asks, how do you differentiate crypto and tokens, Alec?
So, there's a lot of different cryptocurrencies that are solving different problems, but I think that it's a whole different rabbit hole. And so I think it's important to look at the use case and the value add of each independent cryptocurrency and what they're trying to solve, and whether or not that token is actually needed. So there's different sort of theories and communities within crypto. So there's like Bitcoin maxis, I guess, is like a common sort of meme within the crypto space, where like people only believe Bitcoin has value, they don't believe anything else has value. And so I think that it's going to be really hard to replicate the network effect of something like Bitcoin, right? Because the biggest value of Bitcoin is like it's a decentralization. So it's that there's no way to hack the network unless you have convergence over 51% of the miners, and all those miners are people all around the world with different economic incentives that don't know each other, that have competing interests. So for them to all converge together and debase the network would be very, very hard. And that's kind of like a one-time phenomenon. So it's hard to have decentralization because you have to have an organic birth of a new asset that people don't know about. Because now if a new crypto gets started, it's almost impossible to have that decentralization nature, because there's so much incentive to just mine that crypto that like there could be a lot of people that just centralize control over that. Whereas with Bitcoin, it kind of grew organically when people didn't know what it was. So it allowed it to grow in a decentralized way. It has this network effect. So when people say like, oh, this is the next Bitcoin, it's like, I think that's not really like, I don't really necessarily agree with that point of view, because it's really hard to replace the network effect and the decentralization that Bitcoin has. Doesn't mean that other cryptos can't have use case. I think there's actually other cryptos that have use case. What you guys are doing at Unit with social tokens, I believe social tokens are going to be huge. I believe play to earn tokens on crypto gaming is going to change the gaming industry. This is my main thesis in crypto. I talk about play to earn games. I have articles and videos about this. So there are cryptos that have other use cases, I think. Ethereum, what they're doing with smart contracts is unique. They're allowing NFT infrastructure. So, I mean, there's other cryptos that have use cases, but I would say that most people that speculate on random cryptos are doing it to, you know, get rich. They're doing it to make more money in a short amount of time. This leads to very big bubbles, and it frankly leads to most people losing money and getting wrecked. So that's why my typical like recommendation, like what I would recommend, you know, my mom to do or something like that, is just be like, buy Bitcoin and hold Bitcoin. Don't trade. Don't try and get cute with other things, and you know, just avoid getting wrecked. Like the most, I guess the most depressing thing would be to get on the right train and then just like your train crashes where all the other ones go full up, right? Like imagine losing money in crypto. Like it's like kind of depressing because it's like the best performing asset of the last decade, and you're the one losing money in that space. Like that's sort of depressing. So it's like avoid the things that are going to get you wrecked, right? Crypto's about survival. So yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Alec. You have another 10 minutes with us?
Sure. No, I can answer
Okay.
questions. No problem. Or,
Okay, that's cool. So what we're gonna do is now we go into breakout rooms. I open them and you can go into the Alec room, and whoever has like specific questions to Alec, I know there are a lot more than we can actually answer here. Then
yeah,
go
and you
into
guys
the
can reach
Alec
out
room.
to me on social media or join my Telegram or Discord, and there's hundreds of people in there. You guys could talk with me and us, and I could answer questions, or you know, I'll take your questions and put them into videos or pieces of content. I do that sometimes when people have questions, and I just make you a video or whatever. So yeah.
Yeah, amazing. So now you can go for 8 minutes and speak directly to Alec without moderation. And then there's other rooms like NFT projects, Eat Denver, Ask Anything About Unit, and so on. So you can choose where you guys want to go, and then we come back here in 8 minutes and just close the session.
Yeah, I have an interview with Michael about Unit 2 that we did in April. It's on my other channel, so that's cool too. You guys want to check that out?
We're gonna publish the link also in the Telegram chat group for Unit Masters.
Yeah, we got to do another follow up too. There's so much that's been developed since I talked. I mean, I talk to Michael all the time, but since I talked to him last. Anyway, cool. I'm happy to join this breakout room. Where do I go?
You're seeing the Alec room? That's your room.
Oh, I see the breakout rooms.
All
Oh,
right.
I see.
Everyone just click on breakout rooms like every session and then go to the room that interests you.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Final word goes to Alec for the wrap up of what you want us to take away today.
That the most valuable thing you have is your knowledge. So spend as much time as possible learning everything you can. Don't take anything I say for truth. You know, things change fast in crypto. My opinions might change tomorrow. You know, being educated is the most valuable thing you have. I'm sorry I couldn't follow up with some of your questions. DM me on any social media. I read all my comments. I respond to pretty much everything. I'm happy to follow up with any of you guys. So thank you for your time today. I much appreciate it. And I know you guys have other sessions, so that's it.
Thank you, guys. Thanks all for being here, and see you again on Tuesday.
See
Bye,
you.
guys. Thank you,
Bye.
Alec.